Hello team and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MSP. It's Ukraine War Frontline update for the 24th of September 2023. I've left this one a little bit later today before doing the update, and probably wise to have done so given that there is a fair bit of movement here and there in small areas of the front line that I think is pretty significant. If you want to know what the lines on my map mean, please pause the video and check out the legend on the screen in front of you, and we will start in the northeastern sector, the Kupiansk to Svatova to Crimean front line. No real news coming from Kupiansk to Svatova. I'm going to skip over the Institute for the Study of War report, daily report, because that was released last night, and actually there's been most of the day since, and in fact it's due to be released again in a mere couple of hours. So I will park that. There's no doubt activity going on up and down here, but no movement in the line. There has been a bit of a change here, which I thought was fairly significant from Suryat Maps, but then be warned, because Suryat Maps shows quite a significant difference between their idea of where the Russian front line is and Andrew Perpetua's idea of where the front line is. So it really is, I mean, if we look at that in terms of actual distance from one to t'other, you've got, best part of 2 kilometers of difference right across there. So yeah, quite a big change. Now, Suryat Maps has said that situation on the eastern front, some map modifications were made northeast of Nokomayanska due to looking at different kind of video footage and whatnot. So it's not that the Ukrainians have made gains, as I've signified there, but that's just a generic sort of pin for me. It's a bit of a rejig. I probably should have put rejig rather than, as I say, gain. So you can see that there's such a difference there that someone is wrong, and my intuition would be that Suryat Maps is probably the least accurate of the two in this area, as in I guess many areas, not all the time though. And yeah, there's a bit of a rejig there. There have been some gains, as according to Deep State Map, the pro-Ukrainian mapper, that has some Russian gains around the Orikovo-Vasilivka area, just by the E40, the M03 highway coming into the north of Bakhmut there. There has been some fairly testy fighting over the last few weeks, month really, there, as the Ukrainians were slowly coming down the highway and biting away at chunks of the Russian territory there. But it seems like the Russians have fought back a little bit. This is quite difficult terrain in that area, as I've talked to you before. These are lower grounds. These are kind of like basins almost, as the water, you can see this is where water would be going. Let's just do a little bit of 3D evaluation here. So you can see that there is a bit of a bowl going on there, higher ground coming here. The Russians have this high ground as it kind of slips down, descends down there, and the Ukrainians are on the low ground as they come across here, although not necessarily on the highway as it comes along there. And then when you get to this area, same sort of thing. You've got a bit of a bowl, a bit of a basin there that some kind of small river stream sort of works along and then comes down. That's why you see all this sort of vegetation around. Same with that as it joins, a little sort of tributary coming down to join here. And that gives you an idea of what the topography is doing in the area. Anyway, that is just that area there. A little bit of, as I say, a little bit of gain for the Russians. Then we're going to come down to the south of Bakhmut, where, as ever, you can imagine there's a lot going on around Klishchivka. This is all about clearing the Russian lines back to the railway line, and in some, hopefully for the Ukrainians, in some places behind the railway line. So what do we have? Well, first of all, there were gains that I showed you yesterday. I've kind of taken the pins off. I've left that one there, but just to remind me that there were gains that we saw yesterday for the Ukrainians in terms of pushing the Russians back in this area to the west, to the east, in the northerly area of Klishchivka. The Russians were holding on to that. Although Andrew Perpetua was unsure for some time, he said it could have been under Ukrainian control. Well, that's been confirmed. According to Suryat Maps, there's still a Russian line, a Russian tree line, or road actually here, with a little bit of a tree line at the top, that they apparently control, but no one else has that. Andrew Perpetua doesn't have that, and Suryat Maps has actually taken a chunk off that and given that to the grey zone. So the Ukrainians have pushed the Russians back, the Russian defensive line now in this area. So it basically came across here like that, give or take, and now this whole area is not Russian controlled. And the significant thing here, and you can see that all the mappers agree that Ukrainians have made some gains here. So we come to the Bakhmut sources. We'll talk about this in a second, but they all claim that there are gains here by the railway line, in fact, across the railway line. And that is really important because this railway line, as a raised embankment, contains a lot of dugouts and tunnels, and that allows the Russians to keep defending there and use that quite successfully, although they have been pushed back past it in a number of places and now here too. There is a bit of a challenge for the Ukrainians that there's quite a few sort of lakes and it's a marshy area to the east of the railway line before it goes sort of uphill towards the road that comes through Avdiivka and goes towards Robotyne to the south of Bakhmut here. So this, as it follows the river, this is I presume that's a Bakhmutivka river. This is is fairly marshy, and there are only certain areas that are easy to get across. You know, certain areas that have kind of roads across that, or tracks more precisely. I think across the edge of some of these water features, they'll have to use them carefully. Obviously, when you are forced to make crossings over at only at certain points, they become, much greater targets for the opposition. So let's have a look at what's going on in Bakhmut in general. We are cutting off the logistics routes of the Russians in eastern Bakhmut, in the Bakhmut direction, says Yevlash, the head of the press service of the Eastern Group. The Ukrainians are already reaching Bakhmut-Holivka Highway, 3 kilometers from the contact line. This is the working distance for mortars and drones. So that is reaching them not but on foot or with mechanized equipment, but with drones and mortars. As you can see there, we'll zoom out. This is this road, and if we look at the distance from, say, that road to back here, then it's fairly easy to get mortar teams in this kind of area, as well as use drones that's well within drone range, and so they can hit targets on that road now, rather than concentrate on Russian forces here. We might see this road being the source of a lot of new footage coming out from drone strikes and mortar strikes and whatnot, and artillery, of course, as well. So that is obviously going to be very useful to cut the logistics. They had some success in Klishchivka, partly because of cutting off the Russian logistics, so they're unable to supply effectively the troops that were left there, and that forced them to pull out. If they can, it's not very easy to, as I mentioned, with this sort of marshy, wet area, it's not very easy to supply the troops that are still in those dugouts in the embankment there. So if they're hammering logistics here, and if this is fairly open ground with a lot of drone coverage, eyes in the sky, then it'll be increasingly difficult for the Russians, to hold on to their positions along this railway line as the days progress. Now, Suryat Mat's pro-Russian mapper has said that the Ukrainian army has advanced southeast of Klishchivka, exactly where we were just talking about, and took over control of this section of the railway between Avdiivka and Klishchivka, and that is incredibly important. As I say, it's almost like a breakthrough, really. And this has now happened in a number of places. So we come further to the south there, that has happened between Avdiivka and Kurdyivka. It's now definitely the case that it's happened near Klishchivka as well, and with possibly elements further up north of the Russians under some pressure there too. Andrew Perpetua says Russians also published a video where they attacked Ukrainians fortified near the railroad of Klishchivka. So this is talking to the sort of evidence that supports this, and also stuff down in Kurdyivka a bit further to the south. So we're going to there now. Russians also published a video of Ukrainians who fortified themselves on the outskirts of Kurdyivka. Right, so down here, this is both Andrew Perpetua and Suryat Maps agree that the Russians no longer have control over this area. This is, you see the canal here, it splits into two and turns into 2 tunnels and goes underneath this ground here. So this is naturally an obvious place for the Ukrainians to attack into Kurdyivka, but of course, like I've said earlier, if you know where they're going to attack, it becomes more vulnerable in some sense. So if this is your main route across the canal, rather than having to bridge it in certain areas, it's a bit more trickier, then you are susceptible to being hit there. But nonetheless, there's now video evidence to suggest that Ukrainians have control over this area there, and Suryat Maps has pushed the Russian lines back to Kurdyivka. There are claims that there are there is Ukrainian presence on the outskirts of Avdiivka, which has been a long time coming. That's certainly true. I don't know that there's any other Andrew Perpetua claims concerning this area. No, the rest of it's further to the south, though. Just to remind you what Bakhmut is looking like these days, it is a bit of a hellscape. It's a shadow of its former self, or a piece of rubble of its former self, which is obviously desperately sad. Ukrainian forces continue to advance in the area of Klishchiivka near Bakhmut. The spokesman for the eastern direction, Yevlash, said that the enemy is still trying to recapture his lost position near Klishchiivka and Avdiivka, but without success. Quote, however, our defenders managed to repel these attacks, gain a foothold and continue offensive actions on the southern flank. In particular, we have success in the Bakhmut and Klishchiivka areas. Now, there are claims that the Russians are, like we have seen so many times, desperately trying to retake lost territory, so they are counterattacking in a number of places here. As you can see, they've had some success to the north as well. So it is not a case of the Russians rolling over and letting the Ukrainians do that. The Ukrainians are having continued success here. They are pressing forward, but the Russians are putting up stiff resistance. And this is that area of the canal that I was just talking about. Surat Map says that during the last week, Ukrainian armies managed to entrench in the western outskirts of Avdiivka. So there you go. So that's the Bakhmut area. We're going to now move on to the Avdiivka area. So we're going to come down. As you should be able to remember, Avdiivka is a little bit like Bakhmut, where although in reverse now, where the Ukrainians have been surrounded on most sides, but it's been fairly stable for an awful long time there. There's been a lot of activity around Robotyne recently, and indeed Surat Maps has the Ukrainians pushing the Russians back just to the northwest of Robotyne in these fields, where they've had previous success over the last week or so in taking important Russian positions in these tree lines that have been apparently pretty difficult to take previously. So that is some great success for them, although there were claims they had taken Robotyne. They were unfounded, as it ended up being. So here, Surat Maps, with reference to video evidence, says situation north of Donetsk city. Recent video showing Russian shelling of Ukrainian positions northwest of Robotyne allowed them to correct the front line on this axis. So this might well be more of a corrective rather than the Ukrainians retaking those positions. And as you can see, Andrew Perpetua has no change there, and has had the Ukrainians pushing the Russians back to that defensive line for some time. As you can see, there's still quite a bit of difference between the two mappers, to the tune of perhaps a kilometre or so there. Right, so that's some change in the mapping, I guess, rather than saying they're successful, the Ukrainians. It might look like that, but it's more of a case of rejigging. Now, when we come down to past Avdiivka, on the way past Nevelska, on the way to Mariinka, we have Krasnohorivka, another Krasnohorivka, because remember, there is one just to the north of Avdiivka. Remember yesterday, the Ukrainians were seen to have some success between Novobakhmutivka and Krasnohorivka by this railway line, pushing the Russians back there. They had new positions on the eastern side of the railway line there. Well, anyway, coming further down, the Ukrainians have been pushed back now. So it's boots on the other, shoes on the other foot here. We have, where is it? Not Surat Maps. We have Global War Monitor saying Russia has captured 2 trenches southeast of Krasnohorivka, Donetsk. This is the first time Russia has captured a Ukrainian position in this area since February 2022. So that is arguably fairly significant. Andrew Perpetua talks also about this. He says Ukraine has published a video attacking Russians on a rail line near Krasnohorivka. It shows, therefore, a Russian advance, and that's a railway line moving up there. Railway line and tree lines either side of the railway line. So the Russians are in position there for them to be attacked, of course, and that signifies a Russian advance. Right, coming further to the south, we are moving. I don't think there's anything else in the Avdiivka area. We are just going to show you evidence that the Russians are still using aviation widely in the area. This is some more evidence of the FAB or KAB 500 bombs, those guided gliding bombs released from aviation that have a pretty decent range. And well, although some of the accuracy is a little bit hit and miss for these, they are pretty effective when they hit their targets. They are using them to take out these buildings in Vuhledar because the buildings are still standing by and large. Artillery doesn't really give them structural challenge, but the FAB 500 bombs do, and they can reduce these eventually to rubble, which is significant because these allow the Ukrainians, if you remember, this is higher ground in Vuhledar, looking down on Pavlivka and Mikhailska. They can spot for drones, they can spot for artillery, and they can even use ATGMs, anti-tank guided missiles, and sniper rifles from these positions. As you can see, that's 2 kilometers, which isn't too far. ATGM ranges, that's easily within ATGM range. And the Russians have been, up in these Dacha area there. So it's quite a challenge if the Ukrainians can get to the top of these high-rise buildings and have such good sight downhill. So the Russian answer to that is flatten the buildings with FAB 500s. Okay, we're going to come along to the west to this Velika Novosilka salient. Now, what there is to say about here is, I don't have the tweet anymore, but this morning I shared it with you, which is a Russian claim that the Ukrainians are moving about 10,000 troops from the Velika Novosilka salient and the Vasilivka salient over here to the Robotyne sector. So there is potentially there has been, we've seen there's a quietening down of activity around Velika Novosilka. That's been the case for about 3 weeks now. Well, it could be in line with what NATO or the US has been asking, which is a single point of attack and then pile into there and make a really big difference, create a breakthrough, and then exploit that breakthrough. There are varying claims. Some claims today, we'll come on to this, the ISW, for example, saying that there is a breakthrough here around Verbovy. Other people saying it doesn't signify a breakthrough, but the Ukrainians are definitely improving their lot in the area. It will be coming at quite a loss. This is going to be a heavy bit of offensive activity here, especially given the Russians have their very best troops. Both sides have their very best troops there, although I would argue that the Russians are seriously degraded and are not only lacking in force quantity, as in the number of troops they have from each, like say the 7th or 76th or whatever brigade is being used there, their VDV, their Marines. Not only do they have fewer of them and it's not a full complement, there might indeed be elements of, but they also have an issue with force quality. So when those elite troops have been, since they've been fighting since the beginning of the war, they've been reconstituted a number of times, and in reconstituting they get replaced not with elite troops but with Mobics who have relatively very little training and experience. So those elite troops aren't quite what Russia would hope they'd be. So what do we see around this salient? Well, there's success for all 3 mappers that I use. Success in terms of the Ukrainian success in terms of what Deep State map is claiming towards Verbove. The other 2 mappers, more success around the Novoprokopivka area, and Andrew Popech has a bit of success between the 2. It's probably worth looking at the trench lines around here. Unfortunately, I don't have that on my map. I'm trying to see a way of doing that. I might just have to draw them on kind of by hand rather than import them as data from other maps. So I don't think my mapping and other maps are compatible for doing that. But anyway, that's neither here nor there for you guys. At the moment here, we have the Ukrainian success at the moment has been about, this is Andrew Popech's map, about moving along the trenches towards Verbove, and there are claims that they're fighting on the outskirts of the town now in the buildings there. And the same goes for Novoprokopivka, where they're fighting on the outskirts there too. So Ukrainian infantry were ambushed, but that is to say that they are there in the outskirts of that town too. But we'll concentrate on the Verbove area at the moment. They are between they've negotiated themselves over the tank ditches and the Dragon's Teeth here. They've moved into the manned trenches here, and then they waited some time until they started using mechanized equipment, and they are now continuing to use mechanized equipment to support their combined arms maneuvers in this area. Right, there's quite a bit to say about this, let's go through a number of the different sources. So Andrew Perpetuous says, today is a real bad day. He said this last night. A real bad day for the Ukraine isn't advancing, schmucks. So he gets a little bit frustrated with the Ukraine are advancing too slowly. And he's like, well, what would you expect? This is exactly what you'd expect if you knew what you're talking about, type thing. And he's pretty confident that, in fact, the Ukrainians are doing well, relatively speaking, and they are advancing consistently. P-Star 11 said yesterday, I told you so, the Russians are in trouble. The 76th, which was supposed to threaten the Ukrainians' rear, seems already exhausted. After a bit more than 2 weeks, the cracks are about to widen. So he was pretty bullish about what's going on there. The front may collapse thanks to tactical regrouping, and he refers to a few sources here, and he says, also that we will all be killed here like partridges at a shooting range, says a Russian source. As humanitarian gesture, I've decided to publish in full the appeal of the Moscow boys soon surrounded at the front in Zaporizhia. By the way, this is the boys from the Russian 7th Airborne, so another VDV unit. They say, dear mothers, sisters and wives, we love you very much. We are fighting as best we can, but without your support, we will all be killed here like partridges at a shooting range. We love Russia, but here in the Zaporizhia region of Russia, the locals hate us. What are we fighting for? We are strangers here. We are tired and want to go home. Why die? Publish our proclamation. We only trust you. So that's the thoughts of some Russians there. Another one here. I wonder how long the Shoiguevsky MD will hide the breakthrough at Verbove, and will at least something be done to prevent the complete encirclement of the 56th, 7th, or will we again listen to stories about tactical regrouping and a month later read a bunch of obituaries in local public pages, which is, what's been claimed before, but this is yet another piece of the jigsaw to give us an idea that A, things aren't good for the Russians, and B, it's been bad for the Russians previously, and or will we again listen to stories about tactical regrouping? So this is saying we claim that we're doing tactical regrouping, but it's us having our asses handed to us, essentially. And a month later, read a bunch of obituaries in local public pages. Give General Toplinsky the opportunity to correct the situation before the front collapses. Stop putting pressure on those who are not afraid to tell you the truth about the state of affairs. But the crest's not your own, the Ukrainians. So, yeah, another, again, as I keep saying, another piece of jigsaw. And then what he talked about yesterday is this one, which just a number of sort of different claims. Here we have, okay, if I can just make that a little bit bigger so I can read it. About the situation at the front in the area of the Robotyne settlement. In general terms, the situation is difficult. The enemy cut the Novoprokopivka-Verbove road, and this means that the second line of layer defense was overcome by over-concentrating the forces and means of the armed forces of Ukraine in this area, and accordingly increasing our losses. Southwest of the village of Robotyne, in the direction of the village of Kopani, the enemy also overcomes the fierce resistance of the 104th Infantry, the 76th Infantry, and advances forward. So that's to say that in the Kopani direction, which is over here as well. So you've got Robotyne, southwest of Robotyne is in kind of that direction. So, issues here, issues there, issues there, issues here for the Russians. But of course, it depends what your expectations are. If you think this is, like Andrew Perpetuous said, a computer game where you expect to advance 10 kilometers in a day, that's not going to happen. These are entrenched Russians fighting for their lives with good deal of fortification and guns in hand. This is difficult stuff. There are minefields still around the place. The Ukrainians are grinding away, but it's not something that is super quick, right? Anyway, to just finish off that Russian claim, there is still a lack of artillery support, while at the same time the VKS, so the Russian Air Force, is actively helping and stopping the enemy. So that's to say the Air Force is still doing its job, but there isn't artillery support. But now this is no longer the main thing. I don't quite know what that means at the end, but yeah. It is challenging for the Russians. Some are claiming, as I say, there is a breakthrough, and we'll come to that. Russian forces, says no reports, pulled up a lot of heavy armor into Novoprokopivka to prevent the Ukrainians from entering. There are serious successes by a certain brigade, paving the way for further advances. Most of the trenches in the area are under close fire control. Keep going, guys. And that was yesterday evening from no report. So yeah, they again, really positive view of what's going on. Then More Gonzo today said, this is a pro-Russian source, it said, that the Ukrainians have once again switched to the offensive. Ukrainians managed to reach the outskirts of Novoprokopivka and got it close to Verbove, actually much closer than he states, and improved positions on the flanks of Novofedorivka. Novofedorivka is up here, just to the northeast of Verbove. So close to the flanks of there. So obviously some success maybe along this road. We know that Novopokrovka is an area where the Ukrainians have really tried hard. They've lost quite a bit of equipment in trying to take that just to the south of there. So anyway, Wolgonzo saying there's activity up towards Novofedorivka. Just to finish what he says, there is powerful artillery support on the Ukrainian side, something we keep hearing, that there is an advantage for the Ukrainians in terms of artillery, both the quality and the quantity of it. We ourselves experienced problems in Kopani, Ilchenokove and Novoprokopivka, he added. So yeah, not looking great. Another source saying the Ukrainians knocked out Russian troops from a number of positions in the northern part of the village of Novoprokopivka and secured new positions. There is a video of Russian soldier killing 2 Ukrainians there that a lot of people are mentioning, but it's used to actually say that that's where Ukrainians are. But anyway, the idea is that they are in the northern outskirts of Novoprokopivka and appear to be having some success in moving through and taking new positions. Another video here, I can't show you. I don't want to whinge. I mean, I quit my job. I'm not a teacher anymore because of my multiple sclerosis. So I was having to find work from home, and I was doing other work and a whole bunch of things. And eventually this channel started doing well. So I took a really big risk and quit my job. And this channel is my obsession, but it's also what I do on a daily basis. Otherwise I wouldn't be able to spend, goodness me, how many hours I do. Anyway, 6 of my last 8 videos have been demonetized by YouTube. I know it's not your problem, but it's a little bit annoying because for some of them, I accidentally, like, there's a boat exploding and it's done by bots, so they get restricted before I even release them. So it's not. But I think I'm also reported by people a lot, by Russians, and so therefore I'm on a sensitive list, I think, and so they really scrape my videos rather than just a random video. If there's some like random trick shot video, then they're not going to be scraping me for stuff like this. So I get really closely scraped, and my geopolitical videos, my last 2, where I'm just a talking head talking about stuff, have been, so it's really frustrating. So I've got to be really careful at the moment. I'm sorry, I know that's going to annoy people, but it's just the way it is, I think. Forces have entered the farm area at the northern entrance of Novoprokopivka, and this is something that's mentioned by Andrew Perpetua to illustrate that the Ukrainians have indeed advanced in this area. So this farm area is around here, and that is success for the Ukrainians there. I don't think there's anything else, is there? Do you have one about Verbove? No. Just around Novoprokopivka. Then we have Defmon saying, based on the geo and sat images, I think it's likely Ukrainians have taken control of the forest between Novoprokopivka and Verbove. So this is definitely this kind of forest area there. There's other sort of trees and stuff. You can see that Syriac Maps has some quite large gains for the Ukrainians, but actually that's really putting it in line with what Andrew Perpetua already has. So I think that's more to do with catching up there and rejigging than what the Ukrainians did yesterday. So just a few more sources. No report says the 46th Brigades, the Ukrainians, are making progress towards Novoprokopivka. Due to OPSEC, cannot reveal too much, but there is decent progress southeast of Robotyne that lays the foundations for further advances, and they are advancing along the trenches west of Verbove as well. Global War Monitor says footage, unsure of recent, seems to show that Russian shelling of Ukrainian positions inside the village of Novoprokopivka. Again, that's where I was showing you before, so actually that is now the grey zone here. So the Russians are shelling there, and that indicates that the Ukrainians are there. Unconfirmed whether Ukraine currently holds it. So that is something to bear in mind, that actually that it could be, it's quite probable that Ukrainians will go in, get hammered by Russian artillery and whatnot, and then pull out, go in, pull out. So, whether they control any of these areas is arguable, right? Pro-Russian Telegram channels claim that Ukraine has entered Verbove. That's significant because that is over here, which is to say that Ukrainians are arguably in there. Quite how much they're in there, I guess it's going to be pretty dynamic at the moment. The Russians say the Ukrainians have entered the settlement Willow and Twig further to the east, so that's the name of those settlements translated. There is less than 7 kilometers left until the 56th Airborne Infantry Regiment is completely surrounded by the 7th Airborne Infantry Regiment. The commander of the 56th Airborne Infantry Regiment, P. Tikov, cannot make any decision. He rushes about like a monkey in a cage. If in the next 10 hours there is no decision, the 56th Infantry Rifle is to pre-prepared positions, then the 56th Infantry Rifle will end up in the cauldron. So this is the idea that in the area, the Russians are in certain places really risking being surrounded by the Ukrainians. I don't know exactly where though the 56th are in order to be that close to being encircled, because it does seem like there's you can get out from a lot of places here, unless it's talking about activity up here. But yeah, I'm not too sure about that, what to make of that. Trentelenko talks about the Ukrainian units entering Novopokrovivka on the Tokmak axis, and they are pushing hard slightly west of Lvove. The Ukrainians also cut off a lateral road between Novopokrovivka and Lvove. The Russians' armed forces have been using that as a means of shuttling units between the two villages and a weak point. So there is a road. He's responding to what is being claimed by the ISW, George Barros, who says, "We're calling it. Ukrainian forces have achieved a tactical breakthrough west of Lvove. The fight is not over yet, and Ukrainian forces have a long ways to go, but this is a positive development." So he then goes on to basically talk in some detail, but I think with others, it sort of says it's not so much of a breakthrough. But anyway, it depends what you define as a breakthrough. He says, Trenchelenko says, "I think the Ukrainians have an opportunity to quickly widen the breach, also giving them opportunity to find more weak points along the trench system. I'm told the Ukrainian assault unit's biggest problems are waves of Russian APV drones," so I think first-person view drones, "attacking infantry assault groups in daylight. So the Russians have picked up on the use of FPVs and are using them effectively on a front line there. This implies Russia has a new generation of FPV drones with a wider range of control frequencies, either outside Ukrainian jammer coverage or on too many different frequencies for the available Ukrainian jammer radiated power to cover them all at once. More powerful AFU jammers are easier to geolocate and be destroyed with Russian artillery. So there is no good solution short of Ukrainians fielding more in numbers and more sophisticated direction finders and jammers. In war, the enemy always gets a vote." So that's, I thought, an interesting observation there. And just, I know I've been belaboring this point, but just another thing, people saying it would be correct to say that the Surovikin defense system west of Lvove has been broken since all 3 layers have been cracked in a small area, but without significant force passing through, the term breakthrough would be premature. And this is what many people are saying, that actually don't agree with the ISW assessment that there's a proper breakthrough, but they have compromised, I guess, the Russian lines there. Now, will this be a dam breaking? Will this lead to a breakthrough? It could do. It depends how the Ukrainians react. So the final thread, and I know I spent a long time on this area, but Emil Castelhelmi has got a bit of analysis on what's going on in the Robotyne sector. So we're just going to go through that. Ukraine has expanded its control of the areas west of Lvove, and armored vehicles are operating behind the first Surovikin line. At the same time, the villages of Avdiivka and Klishivka were liberated south of Bakhmut. Are we seeing a breakthrough? Time for a thread. In September, Ukraine advanced a couple of kilometers in fields west of Lvove, beyond the main defensive line. They also captured fortified positions south of Robotyne and continued further south. Russian counterattacks have not been able to recapture lost positions. Ukraine is also now able to operate various armored vehicles on the other side of the Surovikin line, even through immediate Russian anti-tank capabilities. Even though anti-tank capabilities are likely somewhat suppressed, larger Ukrainian troop concentrations and movements can still be seen from the air. And there's footage to suggest, this is Russia Today footage to suggest, that there are meaningful troop concentrations and equipment concentrations across the defensive lines. Even though Ukraine is slowly making progress every month, we haven't seen an actual breakthrough. In a breakthrough, an attack not only penetrates the enemy lines, but contributes to a more significant collapse of enemy defenses in a certain area. And I'd agree that it doesn't look like it's happening yet, but yeah, ISW have called it. In a breakthrough, there should be exploitable and reinforceable success, which brings the defender into a reactive state, unable to carry out the original defensive plans. In this situation, the defender should be disorganized, either forced to retreat or risk heavy losses. I mean, there are, as you can see, some heavy losses in the area. Maneuvers with mechanized units should also be possible, as speed is a central element for keeping the momentum up. If the enemy can decisively limit or even totally prevent all such operations, a breakthrough isn't really happening. Even though Ukraine has not achieved a breakthrough during this counteroffensive in any direction, we have seen a breach. The Ukrainians have captured multiple forward fighting positions and control a section of the main defensive line, also known as the First Robotyne line. The Russians are still able to conduct an organized defense. Their lines are bending, not breaking. The salient at the Robotyne area is, of course, a problem for them, and they still have enough resources to prevent the situation from spiraling out of control. Can we see a breakthrough during this year? I find it unlikely. If the Russians keep using their troops in a sensible manner and focus on repelling the Ukrainian attacks, however, incompetence is a big factor, which can have significant effects, at least locally. I don't know. I disagree with that. I think the Ukraine, and this could be because I'm too positive or pro-Ukrainian or whatever, but I think in this area, we are close to seeing a breakthrough. I think Verbove is going to be really important. If Ukraine can flood Verbove or somewhere around here, maybe even Novopokrovka, maybe even Kopani area, I think it's not inconceivable that there's a breakthrough that can happen, in the next 2 months. I think, fighting is going to last a lot longer. I don't think the winter is going to affect the autumn. Or the winter will affect fighting around here as much as elsewhere on the front line. So I'm not sure I agree with that. One important variable is Russia's losses. It's not clearly known how challenging the situation actually is for them. At some point, Putin likely has to mobilize again. Delaying the decision can have serious consequences for the Russians, positive for the Ukrainians. If you're going to mobilization doesn't suddenly get you 100,000 troops on the front line fighting with guns in hand. That will take months to sort out, especially if those aren't people who have got experience, although you have conscription in Russia, but yeah, it's not as easy as just throwing experienced troops into a front line. So if they call that might be Christmas time that you would expect that to come to fruition. Well, if you've got a breakthrough that's happening like now, that's not going to solve that. So I don't know that has anything to do with the breakthrough per se. Breakthroughs have been generally rare in this war. After the first weeks, Ukrainians managed to do one in Kharkiv last autumn with significant consequences. A smaller one was achieved by the Russians when they captured Lysychansk in the summer of 2022. And so that's what he has to say. Let me know what you think. Is this a breakthrough? Are we close to a breakthrough? How confident are you? All those kind of ideas. Right. Going to go now to Kherson. Sorry, I had spent an awful lot of time on that, but that was the main kind of subject for this video today. Kherson area, Crimea area. So this is coming essentially from Rybar, the pro-Russian source. Rybar reports a failed raid by Russian special forces on Crimea last night. So this is actually the night, the 22nd to the 23rd, so 2 nights ago. That's 23rd, yeah, something like that. Last night, an interesting incident occurred at Cape Katakunkut, which until now had not been known. Under the cover of darkness, a Ukrainian boat with a deep reconnaissance group of the Ukrainian armed forces again tried to land troops on Cape Katakunkut. According to Rybar, the raid failed because a Russian border guard spotted the boat and opened fire. So again, this amazing single person doing this stuff. But these kind of attacks, I think, probably are taking place and might well be foiled as well. The Russians know now that this is a threat. It's not like when the Ukrainians were able to land at Mayak. As soon as that happens once, the Russians are going to be onto it, right? And they're going to have active airframes in the area, spotting and harassing the Ukrainian boats. So it wouldn't surprise me if there are a number of failed attacks or repelled attacks. It would be pretty dangerous for any group to do these amphibious assaults, because actually, although there are these rigs out in the Black Sea there's still quite a distance to get to the Crimean coastline, and it's not like an amphibious attack across the Dnipro River where you're just a few hundred meters away from resupply and this and that. You've got to go there. You're not going to be able to stay there, so it's going to be just a raid. I mean, it's going to be the definition of a raid, and you're going to do your thing, and then you're going to get out. I think that's going to be challenging for the Ukrainians to successfully do that now that they've done it once. Anyway, that's my tuppence. Whether that happened or not, it's rebar, so you take it with a pinch of salt and all that. Thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe, and share. Really appreciate all your support. Take care, and I'll speak to you soon.